Bodybuilder mocks Royal Guard's fitness at gym, then sees him complete the Royal Marines course. What if a single moment of mockery could completely change how you see strength? At Gold's Gym in downtown London, Marcus Steele flexed his massive biceps one more time before the mirror, sweat glistening on his competition-ready physique. The 28-year-old bodybuilder had just finished his third workout of the day when he noticed someone unusual across the room. A quiet man in his early 30s, average height and lean build, was methodically working through basic exercises with perfect form. What caught Marcus's attention wasn't the man's workout, it was how ordinary he looked. No bulging muscles, no designer gym wear, just simple movements that seemed almost military. When the stranger finished his set and walked past, Marcus couldn't resist. "Hey buddy," he called out with a smirk, "maybe try the beginners section next time. This area's for serious athletes." The man turned, his calm gray eyes meeting Marcus's cocky grin, and simply nodded before walking away. Little did Marcus know, he'd just mocked someone whose strength would soon leave him speechless. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Marcus had earned his reputation as Gold's Gym's most dominant presence over 3 years of relentless training. His Instagram following of 500,000 people hung on every post showcasing his 250-pound frame, sculpted through countless hours of dedication and an ego to match. Competition season was approaching, and Marcus treated the gym like his personal kingdom, offering unsolicited advice to anyone he deemed beneath his level. The stranger he'd just dismissed was Captain James Wellington, though Marcus had no way of knowing that. James had been a Royal Marine for 8 years, serving in some of the world's most challenging environments. His lean 180-pound frame carried scars that told stories Marcus's mirror couldn't reflect, stories of endurance that had nothing to do with lifting weights and everything to do with surviving impossible odds. That evening, James was simply trying to maintain his fitness during a brief leave in London, far from the mountains of Afghanistan where he'd spent the last 18 months. As James quietly gathered his things, Marcus continued his routine, surrounded by his usual group of admirers. "Did you see that guy?" Marcus laughed, loud enough for half the gym to hear. "Probably hasn't seen a real workout in his life. Some people just don't understand what dedication looks like." His followers chuckled, but a few older members of the gym exchanged uncomfortable glances. There was something about the quiet stranger that commanded respect, even if Marcus couldn't see it. James had heard every word, but his military training had taught him when to engage and when to walk away. He'd faced actual enemies who wanted him dead, a gym bully hardly registered as a threat. Still, as he headed for the exit, he noticed a poster on the wall that made him pause. It was an advertisement for the Royal Marines Fitness Challenge, an event held monthly where civilians could attempt a scaled-down version of the legendary Commando training course. The next challenge was scheduled for that weekend, and registration was still open. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the gym to find several members gathered around the bulletin board, discussing the upcoming Royal Marines Challenge. "It's supposed to be impossible," one of them was saying. "They say less than 10% of people who try it can even finish the basic course." Marcus pushed through the crowd to read the poster himself. The challenge included rope climbing, weighted carries, obstacle courses, and endurance tests that would push participants to their absolute limits. Marcus's competitive nature kicked in immediately. He'd built his reputation on being the strongest person in any room, and the idea that there was a fitness challenge he hadn't conquered was unthinkable. Without hesitation, he grabbed a pen and signed his name with a flourish, adding, "Current Mr. London Regional Champion," underneath for good measure. Several people gathered around, impressed by his confidence. "This should be easy for someone like you," one admirer said. Marcus just grinned. "I'll probably set a new record." That evening, as Marcus prepared for another grueling workout, he couldn't shake the memory of the quiet stranger. He'd dealt with all types at the gym, the intimidated beginners, the jealous competitors, the wannabe trainers. But this man had been different. There was a calm confidence about him that Marcus couldn't quite understand, a steadiness that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than any gym routine could build. Friday arrived with Marcus feeling more confident than ever. He'd spent the week training specifically for the Royal Marines Challenge, adding extra cardio and functional movements to his routine. His social media posts had generated enormous excitement, with hundreds of followers promising to attend and document his inevitable victory. "About to show these military boys what real fitness looks like," he posted Thursday night, accompanied by a photo of his competition-ready physique. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp London air that made everything feel possible. Marcus pulled up to the Royal Marines training facility in his bright red sports car, stepping out in brand-new athletic gear that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. A crowd had already gathered, and Marcus could hear the excited whispers as people recognized him from social media. The facility was more intimidating than Marcus had expected. Concrete obstacles stretched across a muddy field, rope climbs that seemed to reach the clouds, and carrying stations loaded with weights that looked serious even to his trained eye. But what caught his attention most was the instructor standing at the front of the group, Sergeant Davies, a 30-year veteran whose reputation among the Marines was legendary. "Listen up," Davies barked, his voice cutting through the morning chatter. "This isn't a game, and it's not a photo opportunity. The Royal Marines Course is designed to break people. If you're here for Instagram likes, there's the exit." His gaze swept across the group of about 30 participants, lingering on Marcus's designer gear with barely concealed amusement. Marcus felt his confidence waver for just a moment before his ego reasserted itself. As Davies continued explaining the rules, Marcus noticed movement at the back of the group. The quiet stranger from the gym was there, dressed in simple military surplus gear, listening intently but without the nervous energy that was affecting most participants. Their eyes met briefly, and Marcus felt that same unsettling calm he'd encountered before. The first event was a rope climb, 30 feet of thick rope with no assistance devices. Marcus watched as participant after participant struggled, some making it halfway before their grip failed. When his turn came, he approached with swagger, knowing his powerful arms would make quick work of the challenge. For the first 15 feet, everything went perfectly. His muscles responded exactly as they had during countless training sessions. But then something changed. The rope felt heavier, his grip less secure. By 20 feet, his forearms were burning in a way they never did during his gym workouts. At 25 feet, his technique began to falter. The last 5 feet took everything he had, and when he finally reached the top, his hands were shaking and his breathing was ragged. He'd completed the climb, but it had nearly broken him. Davies nodded approvingly as Marcus slid down. "Good effort." Time was 2 minutes, 37 seconds. That's above average for first-timers. Marcus felt a surge of pride until Davies added, "For comparison, our passing standard for Royal Marines is under 90 seconds. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. When the stranger's turn came for the rope climb, something extraordinary happened. He moved up the rope with fluid efficiency, his technique so perfect it looked effortless. No wasted motion, no visible strain, just smooth progression that covered the 30 feet in what seemed like seconds. When Davies announced the time, 47 seconds, the entire crowd fell silent. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine intimidation. Everything about this man's movement spoke of a level of training and conditioning that Marcus was only beginning to understand. This wasn't gym strength or competition preparation. This was functional fitness forged through necessity, refined through experiences that made Marcus's hardest workout look like a warm-up. The weighted carry event confirmed Marcus's growing fears. Carrying 2 50-pound sandbags across uneven terrain for half a mile, he found his competition-trained muscles cramping and failing in ways they never had before. His form deteriorated, his breathing became labored, and by the halfway point, he was questioning everything he thought he knew about fitness. If this moment is touching your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Meanwhile, the quiet stranger completed the same event with the same methodical precision, his breathing steady, his form unchanged from start to finish. For the first time since entering the gym 3 years ago, Marcus Steele was beginning to understand what real strength looked like. By the fourth event, Marcus was questioning everything he thought he knew about his own abilities. His designer workout clothes were soaked with sweat and mud, his perfectly styled hair was matted to his head, and his hands were raw from the rope climbs and obstacle work. The weighted carries had nearly finished him, and now they were approaching what Sergeant Davies called the equalizer, a grueling combination of crawling under barbed wire, scaling walls, and completing a series of technical rope work that required both strength and skill. Marcus watched as participant after participant attempted the obstacle, most failing at various points and being helped off the course by the instructors. When his turn came, he approached the starting line with none of his earlier confidence. His legs felt like they were made of concrete, his arms trembled from exhaustion, and his breathing was still labored from the previous events. The crowd that had come to watch his triumph was now witnessing something much more humbling. The low crawl under the barbed wire should have been straightforward, but Marcus's bulky frame worked against him. Where smaller, more compact participants could move efficiently, Marcus found himself stuck, his broad shoulders catching on the wire, his thick legs struggling to find purchase in the mud. By the time he emerged from the crawl, he was gasping for air and his confidence was completely shattered. The wall climb that followed was a nightmare. His grip strength, compromised from the earlier events, failed him repeatedly. Each attempt to scale the 12-foot wooden barrier ended with him sliding back down, his muscles simply unable to respond to his commands. It was during his fourth failed attempt at the wall that Marcus experienced something he'd never felt before: complete physical and emotional breakdown. Sitting in the mud at the base of the obstacle, covered in sweat and dirt, he put his head in his hands and felt tears of frustration and shame begin to fall. All those years of training, all that confidence, all those people he'd dismissed as weak. And here he was, unable to complete a basic military exercise. The crowd was trying to be encouraging, but their voices sounded distant and hollow. Marcus had built his entire identity around being the strongest person in any room, and that identity was crumbling before his eyes. That's when he felt a presence beside him. Looking up, he saw the quiet stranger extending a muddy hand. "You're trying to muscle through everything," the man said quietly, his voice calm and steady. "Sometimes strength isn't about how much you can lift. Sometimes it's about technique, endurance, and knowing when to accept help." Marcus stared at the offered hand, remembering his cruel words from the gym just days earlier. He had every right to expect mockery or rejection, but instead he was being offered kindness from the very person he had insulted. "I'm James," the stranger said, still extending his hand. "And I think you've got more in you than you realize." Marcus took the offered help and got to his feet, feeling more vulnerable than he had since childhood. "I'm Marcus," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I think I owe you an apology for what I said at the gym." James's slight smile was understanding rather than triumphant. "Everyone has different strengths," he said simply. "Want me to show you a different way to approach that wall?" What followed was a masterclass in efficiency and technique. James demonstrated how to use momentum rather than brute strength, how to position his body to maximize leverage, and how to conserve energy for the movements that mattered most. Marcus watched in fascination as this man who weighed 70 pounds less than him moved through the obstacles with a grace and efficiency that made everything look simple. It wasn't that James was stronger, it was that he understood how to use his strength more effectively. Under James's quiet guidance, Marcus attempted the wall climb again. This time, instead of trying to muscle his way up, he followed the techniques he'd been shown. Plant the foot here, shift weight there, use the legs to drive rather than pulling with tired arms. To his amazement, he found himself at the top of the wall, looking down at the obstacle that had defeated him 4 times before. The crowd cheered, but Marcus barely heard them. He was too focused on the realization that everything he thought he knew about fitness and strength had been wrong. As they moved through the remaining obstacles together, James shared small insights that revolutionized Marcus's understanding. "In the Marines, we don't train to look strong," James explained as they navigated a rope bridge. "We train to be functional when everything else falls apart. When you're carrying a wounded teammate through enemy territory, your bench press numbers don't matter. What matters is whether you can keep going when your body wants to quit." The words resonated deeply with Marcus, who was beginning to understand that his gym achievements, impressive as they were, represented only one narrow definition of physical capability. The conversation that followed revealed more about James's background. 8 years in the Royal Marines, including deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and several classified operations. The quiet man Marcus had mocked at the gym was a decorated combat veteran who had earned commendations for valor under fire. His lean frame carried him through missions that would break most people mentally and physically. The fitness routine Marcus had dismissed as basic was actually a carefully designed program to maintain the functional strength that had kept James alive in some of the world's most dangerous places. "I've been thinking about strength all wrong," Marcus admitted as they prepared for the final challenge. "I thought it was about being intimidating, about making other people feel small. But watching you today, your strength makes people feel safer, not threatened." James nodded thoughtfully. "Real strength protects people," he said. "It builds them up instead of tearing them down. That's something I learned the hard way in combat. Your strength is only as valuable as what you do with it." Have you ever faced something that completely changed how you see yourself? Let us know in the comments. As they approached the final event, a timed run through a complex obstacle course, Marcus felt a mixture of exhaustion and enlightenment. His body was more tired than it had ever been, but his mind was clearer than it had been in years. He understood now that strength came in many forms, and the most impressive form wasn't always the most obvious. James had shown him kindness when he deserved none, guidance when he needed it most, and a completely different perspective on what it meant to be truly fit. The course ahead would test everything they'd worked on together, and Marcus was about to discover whether his newfound understanding could carry him through the ultimate challenge. The final obstacle course stretched before them like a gauntlet designed to break both body and spirit. Marcus surveyed the challenges ahead, a series of rope climbs, tire flips, weighted carries, and technical obstacles that would test every muscle group and every lesson James had taught him. His body was screaming for rest, his hands were raw and bleeding, and his designer workout clothes hung on him like muddy rags. But something had changed during his time with James. The desperate need to prove his superiority had been replaced by a quiet determination to simply finish what he'd started. "This is where most people quit," Sergeant Davies announced to the remaining participants. Of the original 30 who'd started the course, only 12 were still standing. The final course isn't just about physical ability. It's about mental toughness, the ability to push through when every instinct tells you to stop. Royal Marines complete this course in under 20 minutes. Your goal is simply to finish. His weathered face showed no sympathy, but Marcus caught a glint of respect in his eyes as he looked at the exhausted but determined group. Marcus watched as the first few participants attempted the course. Some made it partway before their bodies gave out, collapsing on the muddy ground with nothing left to give. Others quit after the first few obstacles, their spirit broken by the accumulated fatigue of the day. Each failure served as a reminder of just how difficult this final test would be. When James's turn came, Marcus paid careful attention to every movement, every technique, every decision about when to push hard and when to conserve energy. James moved through the course like water flowing downhill, smooth, efficient, unstoppable. He didn't waste energy on flashy displays of strength. Instead, he used precise technique and steady pacing to overcome each obstacle. Marcus noticed how James breathed through each movement, how he positioned his body to maintain balance, how he seemed to find the most efficient path through every challenge. His final time was 18 minutes and 43 seconds, well within the Royal Marines standard and faster than anyone else who'd attempted the course that day. When Marcus's name was called, the small crowd that remained fell silent. His transformation over the course of the day had been dramatic and visible. The arrogant bodybuilder who'd arrived that morning was gone, replaced by someone who looked exhausted but determined. Mud streaked his face, his expensive gear was ruined, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Humility mixed with genuine resolve. As he approached the starting line, James caught his eye and gave a small nod of encouragement. "Remember," James said quietly, "it's not about proving anything to anyone else. It's about finding out what you're really made of." Marcus took a deep breath and began. The first rope climb, which had nearly destroyed him hours earlier, felt manageable now. He applied the techniques James had taught him, using his legs to support his weight and climbing steadily rather than explosively. The tire flips were brutal on his fatigued muscles, but he focused on form over speed, methodically working his way through each repetition. When his grip began to fail during the weighted carries, he remembered James's advice about using his whole body, not just his arms, to bear the load. Halfway through the course, Marcus hit the wall that everyone had warned him about. His body simply didn't want to continue. Every muscle was cramping, his breathing was ragged, and the finish line seemed impossibly far away. This was the moment where mental strength mattered more than physical conditioning, where character was revealed under pressure. Marcus thought about all the people he'd dismissed over the years, all the times he'd equated worth with physical appearance, all the opportunities he'd missed to learn from others because his ego wouldn't let him admit ignorance. Then he thought about James, quiet, humble, impossibly tough James, who had shown him kindness when he deserved none and taught him lessons he desperately needed to learn. If James could carry wounded teammates through enemy territory, if he could complete missions that pushed human endurance to its absolute limits, then Marcus could finish this course. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could do something that truly mattered, something that required more than just physical strength. The last quarter of the course passed in a blur of pain and determination. Marcus's technique wasn't perfect, his time wasn't competitive, but he kept moving forward. Each obstacle became a test of will rather than ability. His arms shook as he pulled himself over walls, his legs burned as he carried weights that felt impossibly heavy, but he refused to quit. When he finally crossed the finish line, collapsing to his knees in exhaustion, Sergeant Davies was there with a stopwatch and something that might have been approval in his stern expression. 28 minutes, 14 seconds, Davies announced. Not fast, but you finished. That's more than most can say. The small crowd cheered, but Marcus barely heard them. He was too focused on the hand that reached down to help him to his feet. James was there again, offering support without judgment, celebrating Marcus's achievement without diminishing his own superior performance. "How do you feel?" James asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. His body was destroyed, his ego was shattered, but something else had taken their place, a sense of accomplishment that felt different from anything he'd experienced in a gym. "Different," Marcus said finally. "Like I actually learned something today." If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. As they walked off the course together, Marcus realized that the real challenge was just beginning. He'd discovered a new understanding of strength and humility. But the question remained, what would he do with these lessons when he returned to his regular life, to the gym where his reputation was built, to the social media following that expected him to maintain his image of invincibility? 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in the same spot at Gold's Gym where he'd first encountered James, but everything had changed. The mirrors that once reflected his pride now showed someone different, still physically impressive, but carrying himself with a quiet confidence that felt more genuine than the swagger he'd worn before. His social media had been silent since the Royal Marines Challenge, much to his followers' confusion. He'd been struggling with how to explain what had happened, how to share the lessons he'd learned without destroying the image he'd spent years building. The answer came when he saw a familiar figure entering the gym. James walked in wearing the same simple workout clothes, carrying himself with the same understated presence that Marcus had initially dismissed. This time, however, Marcus saw him clearly, not as someone to mock or dismiss, but as someone who embodied everything Marcus was still learning to understand about true strength. Marcus approached, but this time his expression was one of respect rather than arrogance. "James," Marcus called out, extending his hand. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did at the challenge. You didn't have to help me, especially after how I treated you." James shook his hand with the same calm demeanor, but Marcus could see a slight smile in his eyes. "We all have different battles," James replied simply. "Sometimes we need to learn them alone, sometimes we need help. You did the hard part, you didn't quit." Their conversation that evening revealed more about both their stories. James shared that he was transitioning out of military service, dealing with his own challenges of finding purpose in civilian life. The gym wasn't just exercise for him, it was a way of maintaining the discipline and routine that had kept him grounded through years of deployments. Marcus, in turn, spoke honestly about his realization that he'd built his entire identity around physical dominance, and how empty that felt now that he understood what real strength looked like. "I keep thinking about something you said on the course," Marcus said as they worked out together, James quietly correcting Marcus's form and suggesting more functional exercises. "About training to be useful when everything falls apart. I've been training to look impressive when everything's perfect. That's not the same thing, is it?" James paused in his workout, considering the question with the thoughtfulness Marcus had learned to appreciate. "Different goals require different approaches," he said finally. "There's nothing wrong with wanting to look good or compete. But if that's all there is, what happens when you can't compete anymore?" The question haunted Marcus for days. He began researching functional fitness, reading about military training methodologies, and slowly incorporating new elements into his routine. His followers noticed the changes in his posts: fewer shirtless selfies, more content about technique and mental resilience, occasional mentions of learning from others rather than proclaiming his own superiority. Some unfollowed, confused by the shift, but others responded positively to the more authentic content. 3 months after the Royal Marines Challenge, Marcus made a decision that would have been unthinkable before. He organized a charity fitness event at the gym, inviting people of all fitness levels to participate in functional challenges designed to build community rather than showcase individual dominance. He reached out to James, asking if he would help design and instruct the course. James agreed, bringing several of his former Royal Marines colleagues to assist with the event. The day of the charity challenge, Marcus addressed the crowd with a humility that surprised many who knew his reputation. "A few months ago, I thought strength meant being the biggest, strongest person in the room," he said, standing beside James and the other veterans. "I learned the hard way that there are many types of strength, and the most important ones can't be measured with a scale or a tape measure. Today isn't about proving who's strongest. It's about challenging ourselves, supporting each other, and learning that we all have something to offer." The event raised thousands for veterans' charities and brought together a diverse group of people who might never have interacted otherwise. Marcus watched as James worked with participants of all abilities, offering the same patient guidance he'd shown on that muddy course months earlier. Teenagers struggling with confidence, older adults returning to fitness, people with disabilities adapting exercises to their capabilities, James treated everyone with the same respect and attention, seeing potential where others might see limitations. As the event wound down, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. The arrogant bodybuilder who had mocked a quiet stranger at the gym felt like a different person, someone he could barely recognize. The lessons James had taught him extended far beyond fitness techniques or military training methods. They were lessons about humility, about recognizing strength in unexpected places, about the difference between confidence and arrogance, and about the value of lifting others up rather than putting them down. "You know," Marcus said to James as they cleaned up after the event, "I still can't complete that Royal Marines course in under 20 minutes. James laughed, the first time Marcus had heard him truly express amusement. "Neither can most Royal Marines on their first try," he replied. "The point isn't the time. The point is that you showed up, you didn't quit, and you learned something about yourself. That's what real training is about, discovering what you're capable of when everything else is stripped away." Marcus nodded, understanding finally sinking in completely. Strength wasn't about dominating others or proving superiority. Real strength was about resilience, humility, the capacity to help others, and the courage to keep growing even when it meant admitting you'd been wrong. It was about using your abilities to make the world a little better, one interaction at a time. The Royal Marines course had broken down his old understanding of strength, but in its place, James had helped him build something much more valuable: wisdom about what it truly meant to be strong. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales like this one. As Marcus locked up the gym that evening, he caught his reflection in the mirror one last time. The man looking back at him was still physically impressive, but now that strength served a purpose beyond his own ego. He'd learned that the strongest people are often the quietest ones, that wisdom comes from unexpected places, and that sometimes the best thing you can do with your strength is use it to help others find their own. It had taken a humble Royal Marine to teach an arrogant bodybuilder what true fitness really meant, and Marcus would carry those lessons with him for the rest of his life.